Hi, everyone, and welcome to World Aquatic Animal Day. This is panel one, Turning the Tide, Systemic Change for Aquatic Animals. I'm Miranda Eisen, the Senior Manager of Outreach and State Policy at Farm Sanctuary, and I'm honored to be here with all of you today. This event is a collective effort made possible by the Whale Sanctuary Project, George Washington University Law School's Animal Law Program, and Animal Legal Defense Fund chapter at GW Law. So huge thanks to all of our sponsors. Can we go to the next slide? Go. So, what is World Aquatic Animal Day, or as we like to call it, WAD? WAD is an annual global day dedicated to raising awareness about the inner lives of aquatic animals and the systemic exploitation they face. Every April 3rd, communities worldwide come together to engage with experts, share knowledge, and drive meaningful change through education, law, policy, and outreach. WAD was co-founded in 2020 by the executive director and co-founder of Animal Law Reform South Africa, Amy P. Wilson, and the assistant dean for animal legal education at GW Law School, Kathy Hessler. WAD has, for the past 5 years, created a vital space for aquatic animal awareness and action. It stands as both an educational initiative and a call to reimagine our relationship with aquatic animals in ways that respect their autonomy and well-being. Huge thanks to Kathy and Amy, who are in the room with us today, for creating WAD and bringing us all together today. So why do we need WAD? WAD emerged from a pressing reality that aquatic animals, whether as individuals or entire species, are among the most misunderstood and mistreated beings on our planet. Regarded as property under the law, they suffer from a lack of legal protections, exposing them to exploitation in industries spanning food production, scientific research, medicine, entertainment, and beyond. Even those living in their natural habitats endure relentless human interference, from overfishing and pollution to habitat destruction and climate change. Together, today, we come to try to envision a different future, one where aquatic animals are recognized as sentient beings with inherent value, and where the waters they call home are treated with the care and respect that they deserve. To advocate effectively for aquatic animals, we must first see them, both physically and conceptually. Too often, their lives remain hidden beneath the water surface, leading to profound disconnects that diminish our collective empathy and sense of responsibility. Compounding this issue is the pervasive belief that aquatic animals exist in infinite numbers, reinforcing the idea that they are mere resources for human use that will never run out. This mindset fuels industries that exploit them without restraint, despite growing evidence of population collapse and ecological devastation. The less we recognize their individuality and the more we frame them as commodities, the harder it becomes to establish and enforce protections against systemic abuse. Aquatic animals are not separate from us. They are integral to the world we share. By understanding their needs, struggles, and experiences, we cultivate a deeper sense of interconnectedness, one that compels us to challenge harmful norms and advocate for them to live free from exploitation. This year's WAD theme, Harms and Freedoms, Captivity, Natural Habitats, and Sanctuary, asks us to examine the stark contrasts between suffering and liberation in the lives of aquatic animals. It compels us to confront the realities of captivity, whether in marine parks, research labs, or industrial farming operations, where animals are denied their most basic freedoms and are subjected to conditions that fail to meet their physical and psychological needs. At the same time, we reflect on the importance of preserving natural habitats, recognizing that the healthiest and most ethical place for aquatic animals is in their native ecosystems, free from human control. However, for those who've already been removed from their environments, sanctuaries offer a bridge to a better existence, a place where exploited animals can reclaim some autonomy and dignity. Throughout today's discussions, we will explore how these harms and freedoms intersect and how we can collectively work toward a future that prioritizes freedom and respect for aquatic life. As you can see on the slide, we have an extraordinary lineup of speakers joining us today. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so please use the Q&A submission feature on the bottom center of your screen to share any questions you have. Now, without further ado, I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker, world-renowned ecologist, author, and founding president of the Safina Center, Carl Safina. As the first endowed professor for nature and humanity at Stony Brook University, Carl's work delves into the psychology of animals and the ever-evolving relationship between humans and the natural world. His book, Alfie and Me, What Owls Know, What Humans Believe, offers a moving account of raising, then freeing, an orphaned screech owl, whose lasting friendship with him illuminates humanity's relationship with the natural world. While his presentation will not focus exclusively on aquatic animals, Carl's insights are deeply relevant to our WAD theme of harms and freedoms, captivity, natural habitats, and sanctuary. His work challenges us to reconsider the boundaries we impose on other species and urges us to reimagine a future where respect and coexistence define our relationships with the animals who share our planet. So please join me in welcoming Carl Safina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's really a delight and really quite an honor to be here with you today. And while many of the speakers will focus really quite specifically on aquatic animals, what I'm going to try to do is set a bit of a larger context about our relationship with the living world and our values. And we're going to do that through, let me just get my presentation going here. Okay, so this is me, and we're going to do that through a different kind of a story about what an owl taught me about connecting. Now, this will get a lot bigger than an owl, but we're going to start with this story. A few years ago, I got a text message from an animal rehabilitator, a wildlife rehabilitator, which, of course, as all of you know, is somebody who works with injured and orphaned wild animals that people find. Somebody found this little bird, and the text message to me said, "Do you know what kind of bird this is?" And my first thought was, it looks like a dead bird, but it also looks like an infant screech owl. The rehabilitator and I were on the phone. We talked about how to get this little baby cleaned up and warmed up and maybe stabilized. It looked like the bird was likely to die. When she was found, she was covered with fly eggs. That doesn't usually end very well at all. So she was found really in the nick of time. Somebody had dragged her out of a nest, raiding a nest, I guess. And I thought this bird did not have any future at all. But surprisingly, she began to perk up and to actually thrive. I thought, okay, well, why don't you bring her over to my house? We have some nice habitat in the backyard. And as soon as this bird can fly, we will do a soft release. A soft release is when they just go on their own, as they would do in nature, pretty much, or as close to that as you can mimic in a non-natural setting. So the idea was she was just going to stay with us for maybe 2 weeks until she could fly and decide on her own to wander off, and we would never keep her confined in any way. That was the initial plan. So here's one morning after we went clamming. You can see her there on the deck with us. As I said, we never kept her confined. We wanted her to have a lot of freedom to move around and make her own choices and a lot of stimulation. Clams are aquatic animals, by the way, so I guess we're getting to the main topic. There was, however, a very significant problem, and that is that most of the feathers that provided lift and would let her fly did not come in. So that threw the whole idea of a soft release into chaos. We didn't really know what we might be able to do with her. By autumn, she molted out those juvenile feathers that looked like flannel pajamas, and she looked like this. She was absolutely stunning. And when she molted into her adult feathers, she was perfect, and she was able to fly. But by that time, it was getting cold, and most of the food that she would normally hunt, most of the insects, crickets, and things like that, that she would normally hunt and get um, some skill in hunting, they would not be around because it was starting to get to, we were starting to have some frosts. So I was afraid to let her just wander off. I thought with no hunting practice, she would probably starve or have a very good chance of starving. Um, and I made a very difficult decision, which was to keep her in captivity over the winter. In the next spring, I began to give her some exercise and some lessons in surviving in the wild. So she went from being a wild baby to being captive. Now we wanted to get her back into the wild, and I started to use some basic falconry techniques. I used to be a falconer. So to give her some hunting practice, I got a little fake mouse. I would drag that around on a string with some food attached and give her the idea that that's how you catch food. Baby owls don't have to be taught how to chase things any more than a kitten has to be taught how to chase things. But one thing they do have to learn is that the thing they're chasing does not want to get caught. That's where the skill comes in. So we were back and forth in and out of the cage on a daily basis. Sometimes she'd fly up into a tree and she'd come back down. And one day she flew up into a tree. She just didn't feel like coming down. So she was out there for the whole day. She was out there for the night. And then in the morning, I walked outside and I found a pile of her feathers, and I couldn't believe it. I was so worried about her well-being. And on the first night out, she got killed. Well, I felt awful. But then I thought, hang on a second, you don't have a carcass here. Maybe she just got attacked by something and she got away. I don't know. So we continued to leave food out for her, and day after day, it was still there in the morning. She was not around, and it started to look pretty grim until one evening I was away and my wife texted me, and the text message said, "Guess who's back?" So this little owl, who we came to call Alfie, had spent about a week away from our backyard, was doing okay, came back and decided to stay with us and center her territory on our backyard. And she has never left. I began to get very, very fond of this bird and this very unusual relationship that we had. And this is an actual photograph. Many of you are thinking, well, that's a trick shot. He must have a dead mouse in his mouth or something like that. But no, I simply was out in the yard. She came down low enough to be at eye level. I decided to, I kind of as a joke to myself, see what she would do if I went to give her a kiss. And I got my phone ready to take a selfie. And this is the result of it. So everything was going well until we had a love triangle. A girl who looks that beautiful is not going to stay single for long, so she immediately attracted a wild suitor. That's him on the left. We named him Plus One, so we had Alfie and Plus One. And this is where things really got interesting. At first, she didn't want to have anything to do with him. I wasn't even sure whether they were antagonistic toward each other or there was a territorial battle going on. There was a lot of chasing going on. She was distinctly not comfortable with his presence, but he would persistently bring her little bites of food like this moth he's giving her. And over the course of about a week or a week and a half, I saw a relationship building. I saw them building trust. I saw them being much more comfortable with each other, finally perching near each other. At first, she wouldn't take most of his gifts, and then she did take almost everything that he brought, and then eventually she took everything that he brought. And so there was a bond developing. And I thought, I actually went to school and studied birds. And I learned about things like stereotypic behavior, fixed action patterns, and things like that, all designed to tell you that there is nothing going on in the inner lives of these creatures, that they, in fact, have no emotions, only reflexes and instincts. But what I was seeing here was very, very different from that. I was seeing individuals forming a bond of trust with one another. The other thing I had been told is that birds have no emotions. And here you can see plus one on the left and Alfie on the right, showing very different emotions. He is not very comfortable with my presence. I'm sort of a prying eye there. And she is situated between the two most trusted beings in her world, her mate and me. So eventually they did what mates do. And this is a nest box that I put up on the outside of my writing studio. That's my wife there looking for her mate. Well, not her mate. I'm her mate. She's looking for Alfie's mate plus one while Alfie is looking out of the nest box. And things were going very, very well. I couldn't believe that that little baby actually had survived every challenge to this point, had quickly attracted a wild mate, had taken this nest box that I put up there, all going really, really well. Now, I guess we could say that this is as close as we've gotten so far in this presentation to an aquatic animal. I was afraid to go and look in that nest box to see if there were any eggs, but each evening she would come out for a few minutes, take a bath, shake herself off, go through a little spin cycle, and she'd be there doing that for about 5 minutes. And that gave me enough time to get on a ladder and see what was going on inside that box. And lo and behold, there were eggs. Really fantastic, really exciting. The eggs hatched into tiny little baby owls. And when I say tiny, these screech owls are small to begin with, but a baby screech owl is so small, those are all three together in the top of the picture compared to a white-footed mouse that their father had caught. They were excellent parents immediately, bringing little things like moths at first, and then as the young ones were getting bigger and starting to peek out of the box, bringing things like sparrows that they would catch at night. And then as the young ones were at their maximum rate of growth, bringing things like chipmunks during the middle of the day. Something I would have said is, no, they don't do that. That's not possible. Well, it came time for the young ones to leave. They don't really have a choice about that. They can't stay at home. They can't take a gap year or anything like that. They have to go when it's time to go. And they discovered immediately a very harsh world. First morning, blue jays found them, and the jays were actually trying to kill these young owls, knocking them out of the trees. They were falling like apples to the ground because they really couldn't fly yet. I discovered something I've never heard of before. They would walk to the nearest tree and walk straight up the trunk to get back into the branches. After that first really brutal morning, they all survived. And I said to my wife, I'd like to have names for them. We have Alfie and plus one, but I can't tell these apart. So she said, well, why don't we give them a group name? We'll call them the Who. So we had Alfie plus one and the Who in our backyard. It was a happy time. Alfie was a very, very good mother. Many of you probably have heard that there's a lot of competition among nestlings, and the younger ones get outcompeted, and eventually they fail to thrive and they starve to death and stuff like that. This was exactly the opposite of what I was seeing. Usually by dawn, the young ones were so stuffed with food that Alfie would have to follow them around. They'd try to get away from her. They didn't even want any more food. If she finished feeding one, she would often fly to where another one was sitting and offer that one some more food. So everybody was thriving and doing exceptionally well. And I want to play a little video for you here. This was something that really I found kind of astonishing, and it's how amazingly relational these owls can be. Their capacity for interaction was something I didn't really suspect. But of course, I had never known a tame, free living owl before. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's nice. Oh, yeah. Now, you see, that looks cute, and it is, of course, but it's also really profound because birds and mammals have not had a common ancestor for 300 million years. In our time frame, that's a long time. But the vertebrate nervous system was already fully formed back then to the extent that we can both recognize each other, we can seek each other out, and we can share the pleasure of that contact. And to have this little wild owl lean into my touch the same way my dogs do and close her eyes while I was rubbing her behind the ear there, really, really, I thought was amazing. And that raised a question for me. Why was I amazed? Why are all the living things around us such total strangers? Why have we alienated ourselves from nature? Are we simply not intelligent enough to feel a connection with the rest of the world? Or are we taught our disconnect? Are we taught our alienation? That was the question that I began to pursue because it seemed to me like a really big fundamental question. So, how do you get at something like that? Well, I thought, why don't I see what other cultures have taught about the human place in the world? I looked at indigenous cultures. I looked at South Asian cultures. I looked at East Asian cultures first. And indigenous cultures are extremely diverse. But as far as their relationship with the rest of life on Earth, there's one thing that they have very much in common, which is they view all living things as family, and they treat living things with great reverence. Animals that they hunt are hunts are usually preceded by rituals. They are usually concluded with thanks. The remains of animals are treated with tremendous respect. The South Asian cultures um, see eternal souls that spend time in all kinds of living beings through reincarnation. They see different life forms as equivalent, different but equivalent, not that we are better than everything else. In East Asia, the the focus is on the the role of humans in maintaining the balance of the world, so that what we see as opposites, they see as necessary to create the unity that we see. So we will see, for instance, hot as the opposite of cold, but they will see hot and cold are necessary. You can't have hot without cold. You can't have up without down. You can't have forward without backward. You can't have life without death. That what appears to be opposite is necessary to create the unity. And the role of humans is to not upset the balance that forms the world and lets the world continue to exist. And then you have the West, basically our culture, the culture that we operate in all the time, in which the idea is that humans are better than the entire rest of the world. Humans are more valuable than the rest of the world. Everything was put here for us, for our use and our exploitation, to do whatever we feel like doing. That idea is sometimes called dualism. And it is the idea that creates us against them kind of view of the world and of our own existence. The philosopher Crispin Sartwell wrote in the New York Times that this is the originating idea of Western thought and also our worst idea, because it means that we owe nature nothing. Nature is to give us everything. Well, this was the sun in the middle of the day in July a couple of summers ago. I got a phone call from my daughter right around this time, and she said, I just looked out the bedroom window. I think our house is on fire. I see smoke. And I said, well, the good news is our house is not on fire. Canada is on fire. When the good news is that Canada is on fire, you know that we have, in fact, really upset the balances in the world. Trees are the best way to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but we're letting forests burn. We're actually torching the forests in the Amazon, where we have tremendous fires on the West Coast. Canada had tremendous fires summer before last. Australia had tremendous fires that summer as well. I used to say the world is on fire as a metaphor, but now it literally is. We cannot solve problems when our system perpetuates those problems. You can't solve a problem that you keep doing. And that's because our dualism tells us we could set up a system where we can take profits and have no responsibility. Now, in the US Constitution, we have a Bill of Rights. The United Nations has a Declaration of Human Rights. It never occurs to us that on the other side of that coin of rights are responsibilities. We have no Bill of Responsibilities. We have no Declaration of Responsibilities. Rights are what we want to get, and everybody should have equal rights. But we also need to have responsibilities in the world. Other cultures taught young people to have certain responsibilities to the land and the waters around them. Or else, if they were not good stewards, those things would not continue to produce what humans need. It was based on respect and reverence, and we don't have that in our culture. And that's because we value the world at zero. We see the world as a strip mine and a drain pipe, basically. We've been talking about the climate and warming for 50 years. We've had all kinds of agreements and accords and meetings. They have made absolutely no difference in the trajectory of the rise of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the thing that is the main thing that leads to the warming that we're experiencing. And that's because we don't care. We don't value the world. We take about half the land area for growing food in the most aggressive and toxic way ever devised, with very little thought of any kind of restraint, to say nothing of the trillions of animals that we just yank out of the ocean. With not very surprising effects. Since I was in high school, when we had the first Earth Day, because everybody thought that we needed to recognize all our really big environmental problems at that time. But since that time, the average wild animal population has declined by about 70%. We've lost about two-thirds of the birds from North America since I was in high school, and it's very noticeable to me. Right now, worldwide, 70% of all birds are what we call poultry, basically chickens. 96% of all mammals are human beings and what we call livestock. We don't even call them animals anymore. We don't think about this stuff all the time because we are taught not to. When we get our diploma and we are told, congratulations, graduate, you are now an educated person, we don't know where our lives come from, where our food, water, energy, any of the material we use comes from, where our waste goes. We know almost nothing about what lives around us, the names of the birds in our backyard, or anything like that. But we do know how to shop. That's what we are taught to do. We are taught to be consumers. That's what we are called because that's their use for us. To be a consumer is to be relieved of any concern or any thought about the consequences of our consumption. But what would it look like to love the world instead? Well, at one time, whales were thought of basically as floating vats of oil, useful only to be killed. We've had a tremendous change in how we value whales, and new generations of whales have been allowed to survive. And this is a very noticeable thing in my lifetime. The number of whales that we see off the coast or even right along the beaches where I live on Long Island is incomparably more than I ever saw when I was young. The revolutions that we really need are not technology, they are value revolutions, because all technology serves the values that send it out there into the world. So without values for survival and coexistence, we will not use technology for survival and coexistence. So I'm talking about moral revolutions. That probably seems absurd. However, we've had quite a few. We've had some very, very big and important and fundamental ones, and we've had others. When I was a young person first flying on airplanes, every seat in the airplane had an ashtray. The fact that you're not allowed to smoke indoors or in restaurants anymore is a values change. It's a small moral revolution. And real human progress is always a matter of changes in values. Values go with everything. You can put them into everything you do, everything you design, all the work that you do. So we need to get rid of this completely mistaken and catastrophic idea that humans are better than the rest of the world and get with how it really is, which is that all living things are different but of equivalent and values, and all existence is equally important. It gets a little complicated the more you try to understand it. But I want to also shift gears for a moment here to point out one other thing, and that is that you probably all know about entropy and the second law of thermodynamics. Of course, the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics are consistencies that have been observed in nature. So if you put a drop of ink in water, it will spread out and it will never return to being a drop of ink. That's because the second law of thermodynamics says that all things tend towards disorder. Well, it turns out that living things defy the second law. They create complexity from disorder. They grow, diversify, they proliferate, they evolve themselves, they repair themselves, they take action based on their own interests. Living things are alive, and we know that because they can die. They all have things they must do. They can be injured, not just damaged. And living things are what create value and meaning in the world and in the universe. A thing that violates the laws of physics is usually called a miracle. And that is often used as a logical argument for the existence of a deity. But that's not what I am talking about. What I am talking about is this. If you try to wrap your little human mind around the entire history and complexity and proliferation of life on Earth, it gets overwhelming immediately. So we can try to reconnect in different ways. The sense of being connected to something bigger in time and bigger in space and bigger than us is really the root of religious feeling. And it turns out that reconnection and religion come from the same root word. So we're getting a little heavy here. Maybe I should add a little humor. The Pope thinks, finally, um, unusual for a Western-based religion, finally, that maybe the rest of the world should be a matter of religious consideration. The writer Paul Greenberg and I wrote an article about making Earth Day this day that was really popular when I was in high school, has kind of been almost forgotten by most people. So we talked about maybe making it a religious holiday. And I don't mean worshiping the earth. I mean reverence for the earth and reverence for the rest of life that's here with us. Or reconnecting can just be a very literal thing, reconnecting landscapes so that animals can actually continue on with their lives. Underpasses for elephants, underpasses even for crabs that are migrating to their spawning areas. To do this, you have to know that crabs need it, and you have to simply care to coexist with them. Uh, the autumn before last, there was one building in Chicago at which 1,000 birds died in a single night during fall migration after hitting the windows. They'd been asked to turn their lights down. They simply did not care. Something similar was going on in New York City with birds getting entrained in the lights down at the World Trade Center site. And the solution to that was simply, well, turn the lights off for 20 minutes every hour, let them pass. Various places are now starting to change some of the laws and ordinances to allow birds to pass during migrations. And passage and allowing creatures to go on with their lives is really a big deal. It's a big part of the problem that we create for them. And now I want to talk about this, because we have an enormous problem with the climate and we need to decarbonize. But some of the plans for doing that are just a way of creating an industrial landscape in what currently is the living space for wild aquatic animals. These are the plans for industrializing the entire continental shelf of the New York Bight. I probably should say explicitly that although the current federal administration has put a hold on these plans, I am entirely opposed to everything that administration is doing. I hope nobody thinks that what I'm talking about here, my feelings about this, have anything to do with supporting them. But in a world where we refuse to say enough about anything, and we feel that we have to serve all of the demands of everybody who wants more energy for things that have never existed before, more energy for AI that didn't really exist a few years ago. More energy for um, cryptocurrency. We believe that we have to serve all demands for energy. And that is a problem that runs directly into wild aquatic animals. For instance, these gannets. These gannets fly in big flocks. They are spectacular when they are plunging into schools of fish. Tagged gannets have spent a lot of time in the area inside that red circle. It happens to be a place I know very well because I go there a lot to go fishing. It's a place where there are lots and lots of fish, lots of whales, lots of seabirds. And as you can see on the right there, this place is directly targeted for putting thousands of wind turbines there. This is directly in the habitat of these creatures, and studies in Europe have shown that gannets do not enter wind energy fields. So this is going to basically remove their habitat from them over a very, very substantial part of their living corridor. This is what they often look like. It is not compatible with that. The other thing I question is whether this could possibly actually be clean energy. Each of those upright stanchions is 600 feet long, 25 feet in diameter. If you think of the footprint that it takes to mine that material for thousands of these things, to smelt it into steel, to move it around the world, to put it in place with diesel-powered ships and keep servicing it there, the blades that are hundreds of feet in diameter that are made out of resin material that can never be recycled, and the fact that there's only a 25-year lifetime for these things, and they entail thousands of miles of cabling to get the electricity to shore. I believe it's impossible that the net carbon footprint of these things is anything but negative, or actually positive, I mean to say. In other words, I don't think it's actually clean energy. And what about these whales? Well, it's not as if whales don't, excuse me, it's not as if whales don't already live in a world filled with boats. This is the boat traffic in the New York Bight. And a very substantial part of it is directly related to surveying and beginning to build these wind energy installations. I think it's a terrible idea. I think it very much goes against the idea of cohabitation with aquatic animals. Now, remember that place where 1,000 birds died after striking the windows in one night? All they had to do was put a film that put dots on the windows here. And instead of 1,000 birds in a night, the next year, 18 birds died in the entire migration season. It just takes a desire to cohabit. So what do we do with all this stuff that I'm talking about? Well, I think it's a desire to reconnect and to stop being just transactional in the world and to become relational. Whatever we're doing, we can do it with the whole living world in mind. Maybe we don't need half the land for toxic and aggressive and violent agriculture. Maybe we can grow a lot of our food vertically indoors with a lot less water, no pesticides, and a lot less land. I dream of connecting living abundance and human dignity and beauty through everything that we do and everything that we think about. Technology is not going to save the world. Our hearts can save the world, and they must save the world. So let's work to make sure that they do and that we do. This little owl started me on this journey and taught me that even owls have a word for love and that a little care can take it wherever you care to take it. Everybody says, well, I'm only one person. What can I do? Well, the main thing is to stop being one person. I think Bill McKibben says that. Join up with other people, like-minded, like-hearted people. Think about what you're doing all the time. Think about the work that you're going to do, the various choices that you make every day. Some of them little choices, some of them big choices that affect the rest of your life and your work. So if an owl can be an aquatic animal, there's a lot that we can do that maybe hasn't occurred to us yet. It's largely a matter of wanting to coexist, loving the world, maybe even letting the world love us. Thank you very much, everybody. Oh, you may be wondering about Alfie. Well, she's about to be 7 years old. She's on her second husband. She has fledged 15 wild young ones in her lifetime. And it's been really a lot of magic in our backyard. You can read the story in either of my books, the big heavy book that has a lot of the things I've just been talking about, or the light book for children of all ages. And I will stop right there. Thank you very, very much for your very kind time and attention and for the honor of being with you today.
Wow, what a gift to hear your story with Alfie Carl and to know that she's doing so well. Thank you for that update at the end. Yes, and thank you for that profound and beautiful presentation. We're so grateful that you joined us today. Okay, let's shift gears to our next speaker, who is Amy P. Wilson. She will discuss emerging issues in aquatic animal law. Amy is a South African licensed attorney and researcher specializing in the intersection of human, animal, and environmental rights within legal and policy frameworks. She is the co-founder and executive director of Animal Law Reform South Africa, the first dedicated animal law nonprofit in the country. Amy is also a lecturer, doctoral candidate, and research associate with the University of Johannesburg and a senior adjunct lecturer at the University of the Western Cape. Notably, she co-founded WAD with GW Law's Assistant Dean for Animal Legal Education, Kathy Hessler, making her instrumental in bringing us all together today. Thank you, Amy, and over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that introduction, Miranda, and thanks for that really amazing presentation, Carl. It was really beautiful and really great to be here with all of you today. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to be talking about emerging issues in aquatic animal law. Great. So from being a relatively unknown area just a few years ago, aquatic animal law has really evolved into a dynamic, exciting, and very rapidly changing area of law, dealing with some of the most pressing issues of our time, some of which I'm going to highlight today. I'm really going to focus on some of the more newer and emerging technologies and issues and even advocacy efforts. And I'm going to focus on covering breadth rather than depth. So I'll just be touching on things at a high level. But we are going to go on a bit of a journey. So I invite you to come on an exploration from pretty much the deepest part of our ocean to the farthest corner of our known universe. So buckle up. First, I'm going to set the Anthropocene, and Carl's already done an excellent job of doing that. Then I'm going to highlight some technological developments, some of which are potentially positive, most of which unfortunately are quite harmful for aquatic animals and their environments. And then finally, we'll look at some emerging advocacy, legal, political areas. Okay, so setting the Anthropocene. For those that are not familiar, the Anthropocene is a term that's used where we are essentially centering human interests, much of which has already been highlighted. And how I like to focus all of my presentations and my classes is to really take a step back and recognize that right now, all of us, no matter where we're sitting, we are on this beautiful blue planet Earth that is approximately 4.54 billion years old. And this planet is a mass of land, but specifically water, which is relevant to our discussion today on aquatic animals. And while we don't know the exact numbers, we can estimate that we share it with thousands of species of fungi, thousands of species of plants, and potentially millions of species of other animals, including us, human animals. And we've been around for about 200 to 250,000 years. But if we look at all those millions of species that we share our planet with, only one of us are rights holders, legal rights in the sense of being legal subjects, as we refer to them. That's us, Homo sapiens sapiens, right? So in that time that we've lived on this planet, our population, in terms of numbers, has done quite well. It's thriving. And you can see there just over that shortened period of the 50s to currently now, a very exponential rise in our population. And you can compare that to one of Carl's slides where we saw the decline almost in the exact opposite direction of many of our wild species of animals. And our human population is expected to grow at least quite some time longer, till about the 2080s, until it tapers off a little bit. Okay, and this is important for contextualizing this because we do have humans who need food. We have humans who are suffering, and this links to how we found solutions for those problems. And unfortunately, many of the purported solutions are in fact to increase the consumption of land and also of animals, including aquatic species. And our next kind of frontier as humans, now that we've exploited to such a large extent the resources that we have on our planet, is to look to other planets. We are looking at colonizing, and that's the terminology being used, Mars, our neighboring planet. We're looking at setting up bases on the moon, and we're looking at exploring and exploiting the depths of our ocean through deep sea mining, which are rich with minerals and also full of species who we don't even know live there just yet. So let's take a look at some of these at a high level. Deep sea mining has accrued a bit of attention lately, but it's not a new concept. It's largely governed by international law in the context of international waters. Otherwise, it's governed by the national legislation of each country and the exclusive economic zone. And the UNCLOS, or the United Nations Law of the Sea, unfortunately hasn't been ratified by the US Senate and a few other countries, but it does advocate and require this International Seabed Authority, which is meant to govern deep sea mining and ensure that it's done in the context of at least some environmental protections. It's also done with in mind this common heritage of humankind. So note again that anthropocentric or human framing, so that it's done for the benefit of mankind as a whole. But we need to obviously consider all these other species that we share our planet with. And scientists, lawyers, activists are raising the alarm because deep sea mining is largely considered to be extremely detrimental and potentially harmful, extremely harmful to the environment and ecosystems, many of which we haven't fully explored or understand yet. And because of that, there's a growing number of national governments, politicians, etc., who are saying we need to put a moratorium on this practice until we have a better understanding. And they are in the process of developing regulations right now, even though scientists are saying we're not even at the stage we should be developing regulations because there's still so much gaps in our knowledge. And then, of course, there are companies and people who are trying to circumvent these international law regulations and try and go around it and even start exploiting things as they are. And there's ramblings even of a potential executive order by this most recent administration in the US. This is an example of some countries that are saying no to this. There are global coalitions such as this Deep Sea Conservation Coalition that are raising the flag and trying to get this stopped. but it requires a lot of attention. There's a lot of good literature out there, but again, I promote you to go and look at this in more detail because it's definitely an emerging area of aquatic animal law. And then going from the very depths of our seabeds all the way up into space, current advancements in aerospace have far-reaching consequences for aquatic animals as well as their environments. These range everything from space debris that's in the air, to it landing in the ocean, animals potentially ingesting it, getting entangled in it, their habitats being damaged by the environment, the chemicals that are being released. There's a place called Point Nemo, which is one of the most isolated places on planet Earth, which is known also as a spacecraft cemetery. It's where the ISS will be retired. And it really is a place where a lot of debris is going, but it's also landing in places where we don't want it to be, in the Bahamas, in Hawaii. We've seen the explosions from recent space launches, if you will. And we are looking to increase this quite dramatically, not only in SpaceX through the Falcon 9, but through the Starship, which is the biggest spaceship ever built. And we know that there are harmful substances. We also know from studies, including one by NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, that the ozone layer will be depleted by these chemicals and these things that are being released. This doesn't even take into account new industries such as space tourism that are being promoted. So we really need to think about this context as we are promoting these new harms and the potential harms that they might have. We're also looking at re-establishing a presence on the moon as humans. The NASA's Artemis program is looking at establishing the sustainable, in inverted commas, presence, and many other countries are also doing this. We know that the moon is critical for controlling tides. We also know the impact that it has on water. So this raises very significant environmental and, of course, ethical concerns. And then coming back down to earth for a moment, AI, artificial intelligence, has many different potential possibilities for animals and aquatic animals. It can facilitate their harm through increasing production, and also this is across different sectors, agriculture, fisheries, and even those who are using it illegally to monitor and trap animals, using patterns against them. And then on the converse side of it, AI can help with monitoring ecosystems, identifying threats, tracking species, etc. AI is also challenging our understanding of consciousness and also our understanding of sentience, the capacities. People are talking about rights for robots, which might seem like a far-off idea, but again, it's this consideration that sentience is a value that we as humans value for humans, and if we apply it consistently, then it should apply to others who are sentient too, whether those are animals or potentially robots. There's also severe usage of water and resources for AI, for generating AI, and there's vast environmental impacts, and I know Carl touched on that. Other aspects are AI biases. So these are examples where our own human biases are being replicated in AI models. And there's just one screenshot I like to show. I asked AI to generate a picture of salmon jumping out of a river. And you can see there that's obviously not salmon an animal, that's salmon as food, showing that we as humans don't distinguish between salmon as animals and the way that we see them as a source of food. And now we are replicating these human biases, whether these are animal or other humans, in AI models, and what the implications potentially are for us as a species and our planet. There are some potentially good uses for AI. For example, scientists are working on interspecies communication. For a very long time, we've not understood the animals that we share our planet with. We might be able to understand them through nonverbal communication, but perhaps there's a time where we do understand them through ways that languages that we speak. And I do shudder to think of some of the things that we would hear if animals could talk, but potentially a positive advancement to understand others. Other technological advancements are in the context of seafood and animals that we utilize in the food system. This is cellular agriculture, or lab-grown meat as it's often referred to, plant-based systems, and even fungi-based, and techniques such as 3D printing, precision fermentation. This is across the spectrum of aquatic animals used as food, and it does provide potentially good solutions. It does have a lot of considerations, right? Access and accessibility, access and availability, equity, culture. There's a whole lot of things associated with animals as food, and unpacking those in a new system and a technological system which is inaccessible comes with a range of issues. In the regulatory space, it raises issues because alternatives such as cell-based foods straddle often various government departments, including those dealing with agriculture, those dealing with health, and these departments are now entering into memorandums of understanding and agreement as to how to regulate these. And this is not just in the US, this is in South Africa, this is across the world. And this, of course, raises issues around labeling. What do we call these products? How safe are they? So this is something to watch out. This is definitely a burgeoning area. There's also alternatives for non-food animals, so using robotics for animals in aquaria. And I know there's an exciting presentation coming up in panel 2, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so just looking ahead at some other advancements. There has been an increase in other invertebrate advocacy in the animal protection realm for insects in particular, recognizing the huge number of insects that are impacted by animal use and also indirectly through environmental harm. And this has implications for aquatic animals in different ways. It can help us appreciate them once we start to appreciate that more animals have capacities that are worthwhile, even from the tiniest little insect. We can start to appreciate aquatic animals more. It also, unfortunately, has seen a rise in insects being used in aquaculture. So there are carnivorous fish who need to be fed other fish because they are carnivorous, and insects are now being used or promoted and explored as an alternative to these aquatic animals. So in some ways, we could see a reduction of aquatic animal use, but an increase in insects being used. So not necessarily an alternative, and again, considering the harm, looking at their capacities. In a more positive realm, we've seen a rights of nature growing around the world, and rights of nature is an idea where legal rights are given to natural entities. So unlike humans being the only rights holder, as I mentioned in the beginning, natural entities like rivers, mountains, etc., ecosystems are given rights. It does show an expansion beyond our human species, which is positive because it holds opportunities to expand it further. We've also seen courts like the Constitutional Court of Ecuador interpret their rights of nature provisions, which are contained in their constitution, to include protections and specific legal rights for individualized animals, for a woolly monkey named Estrelita in this case. We've seen Panama pass rights of nature laws, which include specific rights for turtles. And we've also seen indigenous groups try to use rights of nature's frameworks to get protections for salmon using a rights-based approach. And that ended in a settlement in Washington. Also, the possibilities for granting these water body rights, of course, has potentially good, strong protections for the animals who inhabit them. So if we're granting a river rights to flow, then, for example, putting up a dam, which we know can harm animals, could potentially increase and improve their lives and well-being. And just as a counter to some of these discussions around expanding, there's also rights of nature movement beyond our planet, looking at celestial bodies like the rights of the moon. This is a declaration put together by a nonprofit. It's not an international law by any means, but it is a recognition that we need to now, as we expand our species beyond and become or try to become an interplanetary species, we need to protect the basis and the foundations that ensure the functioning of our own planet, while also recognizing that the celestial entity as the moon has potentially her own functioning and systems and values. And then, of course, there's been a recognition of direct individualized animal rights on their own. And this has occurred in court cases around the world, but it's also occurred through resolutions and passing of laws. So one example that was quite recent was a treaty that was signed between indigenous leaders of New Zealand, Tahiti, and the Cook Islands. And it was historic because they recognized whales as legal persons. Certain cities have taken resolutions. This one in particular is San Francisco, which related to the free and safe passage of whales and dolphins. Other cities in Washington have also recognized specific rights for endangered southern resident orcas. And increasingly, we see legislation being passed for other animals, even elephants, in the city of Ojai in California. So there is definitely a growing awareness around animal rights and granting of rights in law and through jurisprudence in the courts. And hopefully soon that single species that I showed on the first slide might expand to recognize beyond us and start to grant actually solid legal protections to the other beings we share our planet with. So thank you for coming on that journey. In addition to what I've said, there's also some really positive scientific advancements and research that are happening around the world that recognizes not just animal capacities, but also the true values of animals. So not only their intrinsic value, but the value that they have to environment. So the value that a whale, for example, has in an environment at sequestering carbon and various other studies. So we can use the law as a tool, law and policy as a tool, animal law, environmental law, constitutional law, and we need to work together. But as we're expanding to all of these new potential harms, I caution us to adopt a precautionary approach. And now that you know more, hopefully you can look more and we can start talking about it and get these discussions elevated. So let's watch the space, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that informative and fascinating presentation. Let's move on to our next presenter, Dr. Lipsa Dash, who will explore legal frameworks for captive marine animal guardianship. Dr. Dash completed her PhD from Utkal University, pursued her postgrad degree from Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Law, and completed her bachelor's at Kiat School of Law. She worked at Banana IP as a patent associate and was one of the selected candidates for the Google Sol Luna Scholarship from India. She has authored scholastic papers on intellectual property law, cyber law, and allied laws, which have fostered new ideas in the legal arena, while serving as a resource for different national and international forums. Thank you, Dr. Dash, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for your warm welcome. So I'm going to speak on aquatic adoption. It's on aquatic adoption, exploring legal frameworks for captive marine animal guardianship. As we understand that when we are talking about captivity, we understand a life. It is not a life that they're living when they're in captivity. So we focus on the good part and the bad part whenever we are looking about the animals, about who are there in captivity. So we also look into the good part of adoption or guardianship, but how far they have been successful is a real question. So aquatic adoption refers to all kind of programs or initiatives that allows individuals to or organizations to adopt a marine animal. So these referring of this concept of adoption and guardianship, when we are looking into two different concepts of adoption and guardianship, we understand that adoption is a very permanent process, whereas guardianship is a temporary process, and we just have to pay for probably looking into the conservation point of view, looking into till rehabilitation, to making sure, like sir pointed out in the first session itself, that we slowly introduce them to the environment. So adoption does not have to be physical custody. It can be sponsorship. It can be educational outreach, or where we are taking protection measures. We are looking into how these how can we protect the habitat, how can we conserve them, and how our guardianship rights will not affect their life. So when we're looking into marine animals in captivity, we look into a lot of laws. Amy has already discussed a lot of legal framework. We understand that in adoption, the legal framework is always attached when it comes to guardianship or adoption. So adoption can be a symbolic adoption, it can be a legal guardianship or ownership rights, which are not ethical in marine species. But when we are talking about symbolic adoption, we are looking into you might have, if anyone has visited while we were kids, we have visited zoos where we had no clue that this is a kind of abuse. We did not have that process of thinking that whether the animals kept in zoos are actually abused, or where we did not have that, where we have seen aquariums, big aquariums, we did not apprehend that they are actually abused. We have seen that there have been, sometimes they name it, the animals are named uh, after the owners. So they say that we have adopted the animals, but the real adoption comes where they look into what, where they justify the captivity. They start telling that why are we putting them in captivity is to ensure there is conservation of the species, the endangered species. They try to raise awareness about marine ecosystem. They say that we are doing research on it, so they're studying the marine life. Or for tourism purpose, they have a captivity. We have seen a lot of places where they have used mammals, or they've used marine animals for tourism purpose, or they tell that translocation is a conservation strategy because these are endangered species, and at any point of time what we want to do is we have to keep breeding them to ensure that they do not become an extinct species. So when captivity or captive breeding is considered, it can be done in any point. There are spaces where dolphinariums are there, there are marine mammal parks, there are public aquariums, and then they have rescue and rehabilitation centers. All of them have somehow justified captivity. They constantly try to justify captivity, but we know that captivity has also given us one of the most, we have lost lives because of captivity. So, as we all know, Tikum was the orca which was put in captivity, and because of that, we lost a life. And the after the death, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the OSHA, solidified the ban on putting orca on performances. But so this was the Blackfish effect. We have all watched the movie Blackfish, and we realized that at one point the movie Blackfish became, the whole point of it came down how not to have marine animals in captivity, because at the end the instinct will always be different no matter how much you train them, because they're not companion animals. They're not companion animals. They're not trained to be that. What we do is we try to bring that Blackfish legacy brought an effect to every kind of dolphinariums, the restrictions, and and we could see that the safety concerns were something which actually was one of the major things that everyone looked forward to. That, and people stopped performing with the orcas, people stopped performing with whales. They continued with the dolphins. They did not know how to step back with the dolphins, because at that point of time we did not have attack by dolphins as of that. However, the blackfish legacy brought a lot of change, and I think that brought us to the legal framework and status of guardianship and adoption. And a lot of things changed when it came to guardianship and adoption. This is a continental overview that I've given. I mean, it's already given a lot of, understanding about what are the legal frameworks that are there. But one of the very important framework that we have come across is the CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And India also believes in India looks, because I'm from India also looks forward, and it takes inspiration from CITES. And most importantly, every part that we look into the continent, somewhere or the other, there are legal frameworks which are significantly there. And they try to so what happens is they try to do the job under the table. They try to put them in captivity. They try to breed them, which have been not which is not which has been they're not legal, and plus they're highly discouraged. One of the major breakthrough we have seen is in Canada. And we in our panel we have Sir Marty, who has been a driving force for bringing that change, banning the whole captivity of dolphins and orcas. And that whole change of captive marine animals that we have, or the US Strong Law on Marine Mammal Protection Act, or Wildlife Protection Act, the Convention on Biodiversity Act that we have, all of these have somewhere uh, started bringing a lot of consciousness in people. It brought a lot of change in educationally for people. And in the US we have like I pointed out, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, we have Endangered Species Act, the Animal Welfare Act. In UK also we have the Animal Welfare Act and the Wildlife and Countryside Act. and the EU Habitats Directive, which clearly points out the directive points out that the animals are not meant to be captively, not meant to be in captivity. So these wildlife, in India, we have the Wildlife Protection Act, we comply with the CITES, and we have the protection licensing rules. In India, we do not have any dolphinariums as of yet. We do not have any orcas in captivity who are performing animals. We do not have that. However, we have seen a lot of zoos in every state, and we do not know, and we have seen a lot of animal, it's just not about dolphins or orcas or whales here. It's about a lot of other mammals that we are talking about, which are held in captivity, and we do not know whether. So what we are told is we are given we are given an idea about conservation. We are told that it's because of research that we are using them. We're using it for some kind of educational purpose. We need to protect the species. However, we do not know how much is actually the truth behind it, because the statistics that we have seen is shows us the lifespan difference of these animals in natural habitat and in the conserved habitat. So in Canada, like I pointed out, one of the best acts that had come out was the ending of the captivity of whales and dolphins act. And yes, definitely the other welfare act that we have. So the this is the status of captivity that is there in United States. Mostly all the local places, they have banned the cetaceans in captivity. Canada has permanent ban on dolphins, orcas and whales in captivity. In Europe, they say that there is no cetaceans in captivity. And however, Switzerland, France, they have all passed laws against captivity. And they also have grandfather laws, which grandfather laws is a very common concept which is used, that you cannot breed them. You cannot continue. If you have something, if you have the orcas or dolphins already, you cannot continue breeding with them because they are there. You need to protect them. You need to give them a good life. But you, however, you cannot breed them for your own performance or government, of course, they have started going to consider the cetaceans to be non-human persons, however giving them a right to life. So we've seen that where a lot of I got this data from the Statista, where and the World Animal Protection site, they have filed a case, and where they've done a lot of research, and they have realized that where the behavioral changes, the ethical changes when it comes to ethics of having the animals in captivity, uh, it is unethical, like right way unethical. And it also changes the whole neurotic behavior. It increases the abnormal levels of aggression between them. They are bottlenose dolphins are 6 times more likely to die immediately after the capture from the wild. They can travel 40 to 100 miles a day. However, we have seen in all the dolphinariums or the orcas captivity that are there, it is just the size of a swimming pool of an IMAX theater, where they can run, where they can travel 400 miles in a day. They're not traveling even 20 to 30 miles a day, because they're constantly rotating in the same place, which is such a small area to be there. So these kind of uh, you know uh, changes, the captivity that we have seen, the survival of the mammals have decreased drastically. The life expectancy of the same mammals in the wild can be 80 years, 90 years, would not know how many. But the moment they are put in captivity, it has come down to less than 20 years. So when we're looking into the behavior, as well as we are looking into the whole lie that we are talking to ourselves, that whether we are conserving them, we are giving them a better life, is really a question. However, we have understood one thing, that sometimes we need a lot of rescue mechanism. We need a lot of rescues, because like sir pointed out in the first session itself, that we do not want to put them in captivity, but we have to find it a better way to ensure that if someone is hurt, so because we have understood that a lot of climatic changes have come. We have seen people throwing plastics in the ocean. We have seen, if you have watched sea piracy, we have seen that how the fins are being cut off and thrown back, and the dolphins are thrown back to the rivers. We've seen a lot of issues that we have found in ocean. So what we can do is we can find out an adoption way. We can look into what positive can come out of the captivity. We know there can be nothing positive in a captivity. Life in captivity is no life at all. We have seen it a lot of times. However, if it is at all the only option left with us, we can always go into look into the programs that are there. There is a process of adoption or guardianship that we say, and we can choose a program. We can look into a lot of conservations. There are whale and dolphin conservation foundation, there's a Pacific whale foundations who takes care of the animal like without using them for entertainment purpose. So you select an animal, you choose an animal to adopt, you look into what it can include, whales, orcas, or bottlenose dolphins, and each animal's background, behavior, conservation is usually provided to us. You see the license that they have, you see that how they have rescued the animals, and then you look into how much the animal needs a donation, what situation is the drastic the situation the animal is in, whether the disease that she's suffering from, or the hurt that he has endured, how deep that hurt is, and how much conservation financial contribution does it need. And the moment you decide on the adoption package, you will receive the adoption certificate. You will look into what was the story, how do you think of habitating it, whether after rehabilitation you think of leaving them in the wild again. And then you keep on, you keep a regular update on the animal. You just do not donate it for the reason of tax exemption and just sit back and enjoy your tax exemption, but however, keep a constant track record of engaging them and ensuring that update is given to you. And you participate in conservation efforts by fundraising or by engaging in participation, engaging, giving a sharing your views, encouraging other adopters, telling them that why we should adopt those animals. So we have a lot of projects that are there, including the Nicaraguan Hawksbill project. There is Guardians of the Ambient Seas project. There's Coral Triangle Initiative, Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. These are all projects which are constantly looking into transplanting these, the mammals, the marine life. It might be turtles, it might be coral species, or any dolphin conservation like the North Atlantic right whale recovery efforts, the whale and dolphin conservation, the underwater noise management for whales who are developing different kind of artificial intelligence or developing different kind of technologies to ensure that the whales are not disturbed underwater when big ships are going through. And the humpback whale conservation, again, the community based conservation in Philippines. So there are a lot of other marine animal guardianship. It is always better that we choose it in our own country so that we can visit once in a while to understand whether they're really taking care or just our the amount of the financial contribution that we are doing either through crowdfunding or self is actually taking place or not. So, like I said, the adoption and guardian, the animals in captivity do not have a life. We understand that. However, there have been success stories of marine animal adoption. And these are three unique success stories that I have come across. Louis Armstrong's rescue, which was again, she was stranded, malnourished. She was not able to swim. She did a lot of injuries. Consistently, they tried to show the essential surviving skills. Louis was taught and then released back to the wild. This releasing back to the wild is very important. Teaching them how to go back to the wild slowly becomes very important when it comes to adoption or guardianship. You can be a guardian for a limited period of time. So, similarly, the Levi was again a harbor porpoise, which was rehabilitated after being found in distress. Extensive medical care was given, a monitor, the tracking tag was there, and later it was again sent back to the wild. Bottlenose dolphin calf rescue case, which happened in 2021, similarly, where they understood, they wanted to understand the dolphin's behavior. They kept on looking into. Nowadays, a lot of artificial intelligence have come where we can easily see what exactly is going through, what problem does the the marine animal is facing. So when we're looking into adoption and guardianship, I think all of us individually, if we are not able to save an animal, at least there are things that we can do. Is stop going to a dolphinarium, stop going to orca museums, encouraging people to adopt and discouraging people to use them as entertainment purpose for an entertainment purpose. Thank you so much, Miranda, for giving me the opportunity to speak on the World Aquatic Animal Day. Looking forward to the questions from the audience.
Yes, same here. Thank you so much, Dr. Dash, for that amazing presentation. Next, we have May Brunson, who will discuss the use and treatment of horseshoe crabs in the biomedical industry. May is a third-year law student at Lewis and Clark Law School. She aims to leverage litigation to advance animal food and environmental justice. Throughout law school, May has interned with Animal Partisan, the Center for Animal Law Studies, Earth Justice, Farm Sanctuary, Food and Water Watch, and the Humane Society of the United States. She serves as submissions editor for the Animal Law Review and co-directs the Lewis and Clark Animal Legal Defense Fund student chapter. After graduation, May will clerk for the Honorable Judge Christina Hellman on the Oregon Court of Appeals. Take it away, May.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to speak with you all today. Today, I'll be discussing the biomedical industry that currently bleeds over 1 million wild horseshoe crabs each year. And this is an industry that many of us here are implicated in, especially if you're living in the United States. So first, a quick background on horseshoe crabs. These animals are often referred to as living fossils, as they've been around for 450 million years and survived multiple mass extinction events. They're more closely related to scorpions and spiders as opposed to crustaceans, despite their name. While there are 4 species of horseshoe crabs, today's presentation is going to focus on the American variety, which lives along the Atlantic coast and down to the Gulf of Mexico. They are ecological generalists, as well as a keystone species that many other species play an important ecosystem role, and many other species rely on them or their eggs as part of their diet. Like many other species today, they are in decline due to human activity, including climate change and their commercial use. And we have seen a 72% decline in their spawning over the past 3 decades. So human use of horseshoe crabs is nothing new. In the past, in the 1900s or 1800s, they were used for fertilizer and livestock feed and harvested in the millions back then. Today, the dominant commercial industries utilizing horseshoe crabs are the commercial bait industries. So they are harvested and then used as bait for sea snails like conch and whelk. But as you see in this chart, as bait has kind of dropped down since the 1990s, we do see their collection for their biomedical value increasing with every year. So what is the biomedical value of horseshoe crabs? The FDA requires endotoxin levels to be tested in injectable drug products such as vaccines and insulin, as well as implantable medical devices. Endotoxins are just a type of toxin that when they enter the human bloodstream, they can cause death or, severe illness. So the LAL test is one such way and the most popular way today to detect these harmful substances, but it is reliant upon horseshoe crab lead. So basically, when these endotoxins are introduced into the LAL test, the solution, the blood will clot in such a way that the observer can tell that these endotoxins are present, and therefore the device or product is not safe for human use. The LAL test was approved by the FDA in 1983, so ever since then, there's been increasing demand for harvesting horseshoe crabs in order to develop this test. And again, it is the most popular way currently to test for these endotoxins. Before it was approved, live rabbits were the industry standard. So as you can imagine, these companies were more than happy to transition to LAL, given that the rabbit method was costly, but also got them for publicity. I think they've been able to avoid similar scrutiny after transitioning to the LAL test. One, because there are no longer live animals being directly used. It's a bit one step removed from the live use of an animal. And second, less care generally is extended to horseshoe crabs as opposed to rabbits. So the industry has been described as a federally mandated monopoly because the FDA has only licensed 5 manufacturers. These are owned by massive multinational firms such as Fujifilm and Charles River Laboratory. And it's a very highly lucrative industry. So a quart of LAL can cost up to $15,000. And the biomedical harvest of horseshoe crabs accounts for the vast majority of the annual revenue being collected off the use of horseshoe crabs, such as factoring in their value as bait. So this creates an incentive for fishermen to be wanting to harvest horseshoe crabs in order for biomedical use and working with biomedical companies as opposed to harvesting and killing them as bait. Throughout the process, what typically happens is fishermen will gather the horseshoe crabs from the sea or from the shores, and then they're transported to bleeding facilities, often in the back of hot and dry and open pickup trucks. They're like disinfected and scrubbed. Their shells are bent in such a way that then a syringe or a needle can be inserted into their heart, and depending on the source, 25 to 50% of their blood is withdrawn. And technically, these horseshoe crabs are supposed to be released after the bleeding happens. This doesn't always happen, as I will discuss. So this slide just shows what the process looks like. So there are the horseshoe crabs being transported in a truck, stacked in these boxes. Clearly, there isn't much care being afforded to them. They're not submerged in cool or salt water as they would be accustomed to. They're strapped to these tables at which point their blood is drawn. And so it's a very industrialized process where care for the animal is completely absent. Unsurprisingly, the industry has pretty severe impacts on horseshoe crabs, both on a species and individual level. Between 2004 and 2012, the biomedical use of horseshoe crabs increased 85%. And with each passing year, the annual harvest is increasing. So in 2023, we saw over 1 million collected from the Atlantic coast in order to be bled. 13% of the horseshoe crabs that are bled are then sold as bait. So their last moments will be being bled, going through this awful process, and then slaughtered to be used as bait. It's estimated that 15 to 30% die in the short term due to the impacts of bleeding and how stressful and invasive that process is, as well as their handling. Regulators stick to the number on the lower end, 15%, but independent research suggests that the short-term impacts and mortality rate could be closer to 30%. And the long-term impacts of, again, such an invasive procedure are not well studied, but there is research suggesting that even those horseshoe crabs that are lucky enough to be released into the sea exhibit diminished spawning activity, which will impact the species' ability to survive and procreate as a whole. On the individual level, it goes without saying that these creatures are subject to death, most obviously, but also discomfort, stress, and pain. They are not handled gently, as you saw in the images on the previous slide. And of course, they have a loss of agency and autonomy over their movements. They are taken, and then 1 to 3 days later, they are released back into the sea. It has to be the same state or federal waters, but they try to release them far away from where they were picked up so they're not re-picked up. On an ecological level, a lot of the focus of horseshoe crab conservation, conversation around it, has been talking about their role as a keystone species. So a lot of the conservation efforts have kind of been a secondary effect of prioritization of conserving these roofer red knots, which is a migratory shorebird that is listed as endangered. And as they make their long flights, migratory flights, they will land on the beaches and eat the horseshoe crab's eggs to fuel their flights and their journeys. So the impacts of this industry is having severe impacts on this bird species' ability to thrive. And loggerhead turtles are yet another species in which horseshoe crabs, not the eggs, but the adults, make a large part of their diet. So who regulates the biomedical horseshoe crab industry? There's 3 levels of regulation. Most of it does occur on the interstate level. And I like this quote from this investigative reporter because I think it kind of explains how this industry avoids a lot of public scrutiny. I think it gets away with a lot less regulation because of how unusual it is. It's not a normal fishery in which the aquatic animal is being harvested to be eaten. They are supposed to be released. At the same time, it is not a traditional use of animals in medicine, as they are not being experimented on. So there's not too much regulation going on at the federal level. The FDA does regulate the manufacture of the LAL test with an eye for consumer safety, not animal welfare. And the Animal Welfare Act does not apply to horseshoe crabs, similar to most aquatic animals, because it categorically excludes cold-blooded animals and invertebrates from its definition of animal. In addition, it's a bit unclear whether these bleeding facilities would fall under the definition of a research facility under the Act, because again, these horseshoe crabs aren't necessarily being experimented on. So most of the regulation happens at the interstate level. The Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission is an interstate compact of many of the states along the Atlantic coast. It was formed in the 40s, and it adopts these fishery management plans, or FMPs, to provide for the conservation of coastal fishery resources such as horseshoe crabs. And in this way, they're able to maintain primary regulatory authority of the horseshoe crab fishery, but federal agencies by law are supporting the implementation of this FMP. So they might take action in response to this commission's recommendations, such as like creating a sanctuary, which they have done. So the two main documents, or the one main document guiding the management of the biomedical use of horseshoe crabs, is the Fishery Management Plan. It was passed in 1998, and since there have been 8 addenda added. Among its requirements, it requires states to issue permits for biomedical harvesting and requires states to monitor and report, among other things, the monthly and annual harvest, how these crabs were harvested, the mortality rate up to the point of release, but there isn't much supervising or enforcement of this document. Also notably, in 2023, the Commission published these best management practices for handling horseshoe crabs for biomedical purposes, which is certainly commendable and surprising in some ways that there has been some consideration of the welfare impacts of horseshoe crabs this industry has on horseshoe crabs. So it encourages collectors to keep horseshoe crabs cool and moist throughout the process and cease blood collection once blood rate flows. However, largely, this doesn't the Commission, it is non-binding. The Commission does not enforce this in any way, and they also describe the practices within it as standard industry practices, so its impacts are a bit unclear. At the state level, there are 6 states in which the biomedical harvest of horseshoe crabs occurs. So they are tasked with implementing the FMP, so complying with those permitting and record-keeping requirements, but the states can go beyond what the FMP requires. For example, in 2023, Massachusetts codified the BMP and implemented the first biomedical harvest quota of 200,000 horseshoe crabs per year. So that is notable in that, at least in Massachusetts water, the BMP has gained the force of law because they've decided to codify it in their state law. There also has been efforts to implement harvesting bans. So in 2 states, there are at least bans on bait harvesting, and then in Connecticut, more recently, Connecticut passed a blanket ban, which also includes the biomedical harvest of horseshoe crabs. New York tried to pass a similar bill, but that failed. At the same time, I do think those blanket bans are certainly a step in the right direction and symbolic victories, but horseshoe crab harvesting for biomedical use was not historically happening in Connecticut and neither in New York. So while it prevents the industry from ever gaining a foothold in Connecticut waters, it isn't necessarily curbing harvesting that was currently happening there. These are a few examples of legal advocacy that has involved horseshoe crabs over the years. I'm not going to go into each one. I think it's worth highlighting that a lot of the conservation efforts do revolve around the roof of red knot rather than horseshoe crabs in of themselves. So a lot of the protections that have been earned or achieved may be may revolve around just affecting female horseshoe crabs or just limiting harvesting during spawning season in order to protect roofer redknot's ability to feed on these eggs during spawning season. And it's not necessarily about the horseshoe crab's inherent right to live free from exploitation and not be subject to this industry. I think it's also worth highlighting that there are a couple petitions currently pending in which advocacy groups have requested that the horseshoe crab be listed. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with those petitions under the Endangered Species Act, because that could have a huge impact and restrict the biomedicals industry ability to take horseshoe crabs in the manner that they are doing. To end on a more hopeful note, unlike a lot of animal uses we see and talk about in animal advocacy circles, there is an alternative currently available. RFC is a synthetic alternative that also is able to reliably detect endotoxins in pharmaceutical products. Although it's been available since 2003, just last year, the US Pharmacopoeia approved RFC as an alternative to LAL. So this is going to enable biomedical companies to use this alternative, this animal-free alternative, without undergoing these expensive validation processes that they had to before, which really disincentivize companies from making the change to this nevertheless available alternative. And we are seeing, I think there is a lot of hope that with this approval, biopharmaceutical companies are going to start making the shift on their own. And we see work of advocacy groups trying to hasten that shift, whether it's like holding these workshops in order to educate biopharmaceutical companies on how they might make the shift, or publishing a public scorecard that's going to rank these companies' willingness to make the change. So I'll just end with this last quote. This time, rather than just moving from rabbits to crabs for endotoxin testing, we have the opportunity to wholly abandon an animal-based method, and rapid replacement of this antiquated industry, and the LAL test is presently feasible and ethically mandatory. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, May, for that great presentation, and also for raising awareness about an often overlooked and underappreciated animal being exploited in the biomedical industry. So thank you so much for that informative presentation. And last but certainly not least, we welcome Marty McKendry, who will share insights on Canada's Free Willy law, which banned whale and dolphin captivity. Marty McKendry is a lawyer serving as senior advisor of parliamentary strategy to Senator Pierre Delphine and Senator Marty Klein in the Senate of Canada. Marty played a key staff role in passing Canada's 2019 ban on whale and dolphin captivity, as well as on the trade in shark fins. Marty has also worked on legislation to protect captive elephants, great apes, and big cats, and a proposed ban on the export of horses for slaughter overseas. Marty graduated from the University of Toronto's Law School in 2012 and has a master's degree in philosophy from the same school. Excited to have you with us today, Marty. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here on World Aquatic Animal Day. So, as Miranda said, I'll speak today to you about Canada's Free Willy law, the name often given to our country's whale and dolphin captivity ban, which I helped to pass in the years leading up to 2019. So that year, after 5 years of hard work, Canada adopted Senator Wilfrid Moore's Bill S-203, the Ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins Act. That was the formal name, also called the Free Willy Law, which Senator Moore got a kick out of because he was named Willie Moore. And this is a legislated phase out of whale and dolphin and porpoise captivity. Sometimes people forget to mention the porpoises. And it's also a criminal ban on performances for entertainment, so circus-style shows, essentially. And this law is grandfathered in, so those two places that had cetaceans prior to the bill passing were able to keep them. And the Free Willy law was one of Canada's first new animal cruelty criminal offences since the 1800s, when our criminal laws were first enacted. So this was a big legal milestone beyond its direct significance for whales and dolphins. Breeding imports and exports were all banned unless licensed for one of two reasons, one being best interests, which was done with potential sanctuary in Nova Scotia in mind, should they be, should some whales be relocated into Canada. Number two, they could be also exported for scientific research, which provides some control as to where they go, and I'll talk a bit about that. In terms of the milestone, inclusion of best interests in the law for an animal was a first in Canada and one among the first in the world. And that's a concept that normally applies to children or persons with capacity issues. So it's significant to the legal status of captive whales and dolphins in general. The federal ban built on Ontario's orca ban, which had passed in 2015, and at the time only one orca remained, being Kiska, who passed away a few years ago. And it also built on the Vancouver Park Board's complete cetacean ban in 2017, which happened in the course of the federal bill, and the Vancouver ban and the federal bill sort of were mutually reinforcing and helped each other along. And that's an important lesson in terms of stepping stones to achieve greater milestones, and some international precedents, such as, ones in Croatia that was mentioned, were helpful as well. So, cetacean captivity in Canada, a little bit about the situation here while the bill went through. The last belugas were captured in Canada in 1992. The last orca capture permit was issued in 1983, although it was not used to actually capture an orca. And notably, one Canadian orca, at least, Corky, was captured off of northern BC in the late 1960s, as were many others. And Corky remains at SeaWorld San Diego and has been in captivity for 56 years, which is a very sad fact to think about. At the time the bill passed, 2 places had captive cetaceans. There previously had been more, such as the 4 dolphins once held at the West Edmonton Mall. Tillicum, the orca from Blackfish, was also previously held at a park in BC. As of 2015, Marineland, the notorious marine park in Niagara Falls, Ontario, held 1 orca, Kiska, 5 bottlenose dolphins, approximately 40 belugas. Today they have 4 dolphins remaining and 31 belugas. There were also, numerous births during this time between 2015 and the ban, so that would add to the death toll, sadly. As of 2015, Vancouver Aquarium had held a white-sided dolphin, 2 porpoises, a false killer whale, 2 belugas, and today they do not have any. The law would still permit rescues to potentially occur, although the municipal ban in Vancouver is very strict. So I don't think they could be held there in any event, but perhaps in a sea pen, for example. And you can see here some of the headlines that whale captivity has generated in Canada in the period of time before, during, and after the bill. So, science. Bill S-203 was endorsed by 20 marine biologists from around the world. Scientists were totally the key to passing the bill, along with other important contributions. But opponents of the legislation, and this was like intensely contested legislation, tried to construe the initiative as activism or opinion in a way that it could be dismissed. Of course, science cannot be credibly dismissed. So, I would say scientific testimony was really the key to passing the law. And the committee in the Senate heard scientific testimony from Dr. Lori Marino, a great hero in the issue of cetaceans, who we'll hear from on the second panel, Dr. Naomi Rose, Dr. Hal Whitehead, and Dr. Ingrid Visser. And you can see there Senator Moore, who created the bill, meeting Dr. Jane Goodall. She gave him many words of inspiration. And this was a social media campaign we had featuring some of the scientists. And notably, Parliament reached legal and ethical conclusions of cruelty due to harms, such as abnormal behavior like stereotypies, health problems, shortened lifespans, and high infant mortality. Parliament also considered cetaceans' self-awareness, intelligence, emotions, social relationships, and range size. Some of these human-like characteristics, I would say, have a lot of persuasive power in the political world and in public opinion. And that's along with intuitions about keeping whales and dolphins in concrete tanks, which I think increasingly we see that there's a common sense element here. The Vancouver Aquarium unfortunately, argued that cetacean captivity was important for scientific research, which Lori Marino did a fantastic job of debunking. But along with best interests, that the argument made by the Vancouver Aquarium is the reason that one of the permissible purposes for exports is scientific research. That was an amendment made at committee defensively in an effort to pass the bill, which at the time the prospects did not look good, but it did make it. So in terms of the legalities and politics, this is a criminal animal cruelty offense to breed a cetacean or to take one into custody without a permit, or to use in performance for entertainment. The fine is up to $200,000 Canadian. That penalty was modeled on California's penalty for in relation to orca captivity. And under the Fisheries Act, imports and exports require a license, as I said, for one of two reasons. And particularly for those in non-Canadian jurisdictions, which I assume is most of the listeners, I commend to you this legal model for of specific animal cruelty offenses plus a trade ban. It has proven that it can succeed legislatively, so I'd love to see this attempts at the state level or in other countries. And in terms of the strategy, a ban with potential licensing for specific purposes that may or may not be justifiable is very hard for opponents to counter. It sort of calls out the claims of the captivity industry. If you're saying the cetacean is there for science, if you make it that it's a ban with potential license for that reason, it makes it a legal standard, and the actual scientific merit or conservation value and things like that can be scrutinized. Key factors to success were certainly blackfish. I don't think this ever would have happened without blackfish. Media coverage. There was one journalist in particular who followed it closely. It would not have happened without her. Holly Lake is her name. And then grassroots and social media were absolutely essential as well. The bill was supported by the government of Canada, which at the time was the government of the Liberal Party of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and currently Prime Minister Mark Carney. The bill was supported by multiple political parties. It was opposed by the Conservative Caucus and the whale captivity industry, as well as CAZA, which is the Canadian private accreditor of zoos and aquariums. It was also notably endorsed by Allied Coastal First Nations of the Pacific Northwest, which was a real boost to morale at a difficult time. And the legislation was passed into law by its second sponsor, Senator Moore retired, and you can see the late Senator Murray Sinclair pictured with him there. Senator Sinclair is a Canadian icon. He is very well known here as the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which addressed the injustices of residential schools and Indigenous children through Canadian history. He's also a former judge and just a very prominent leader, including on Indigenous rights issues. Bill S-203 was the longest process to pass a bill in Canada's history, in fact, at 3.5 years. And I'll share a quote from Senator Sinclair that I find very inspiring. He says, in many Indigenous cultures, we use the phrase, all my relations, to express interdependence and interconnectedness of life forms and our relationship of mutual reliance and shared destiny. When we treat animals well, we act with both self-respect and mutual respect. So those are the values that Senator Sinclair animated this initiative with and inspired many people. Oh, and you can see some demonstrators there who were greeting conservative senators at the Vancouver Aquarium who had come to learn about why not to pass the bill. So applications since 2019. In 2021, Helen, the last Pacific white-sided dolphin in Vancouver, was relocated to SeaWorld Antonio to be with others of her species. She died in 2022. In 2021, Marineland sold 5 belugas to Mystic Aquarium in Connecticut. They were exported with scientific research permits, which again, probably do ensure they don't go to the worst places possible, but it's not ideal. 3 had died by the end of 2023. In 2021, Niagara police charged Marineland with allegedly holding illegal dolphin shows. Prosecutors stayed the charge in considering court resources despite video evidence and what they said was a reasonable prospect of conviction. I found this personally very disappointing, and it was commented in the Senate that by some witnesses at a subsequent hearing that Marineland appeared to be able to flout the law, the criminal law. And there's some headlines from over the years as well. So a topic of much attention is what will happen with the remaining whales and dolphins in Canada. Reportedly, Marineland is seeking to expeditiously rehome the 4 remaining dolphins and 31 belugas in looking for a buyer for the park. Eye-popping 20 cetaceans have died there since 2019, which is almost unbelievable. Exports require a license, as I said, for best interests or scientific research. The Ontario government could intervene if they wish to, or private sales or transfers may otherwise occur if licensed. Options for the whales include sanctuaries in development, such as the site in Iceland and we all hope in Canada and Nova Scotia, or comparatively better aquariums in the US or elsewhere. This is a situation where there's no perfect solution. These whales and dolphins deserve to have the best available homes with the best possible conditions. Maybe that means some of them should stay at Marineland if they can't be safely moved, but with better conditions, hopefully. I would add this may require animal welfare groups and aquariums to work together, particularly in light of the concerning number of deaths at Marineland. For example, I'm not aware of any sanctuary options for the 4 dolphins, so what will happen to them? And this is a picture of the sanctuary we hope will become operational in Nova Scotia, and I'm sure Lori will speak about that. Almost wrapping up here. This is the final slide. So a few related developments. Since Canada's law passed, France, the Australian state of New South Wales have banned whale and dolphin captivity, and the US Congress has considered the SWIMS Act, which is similar but would not apply to dolphins. Everyone involved in this bill would love to see this practice banned globally, so if I or others can be of assistance, I'm more than happy to do so. It's currently a growth industry in some parts of Asia and the Middle East. And a few other just mention-worthy developments in Canada. In 2019, Canada became the first G20 country to ban the import and export of shark fins. In 2020, Senator Sinclair introduced the Jane Goodall Act, and I had the honor to work for him on that as well, to protect captive elephants, great apes, and more wild species. This is the sequel to the Free Willy Law. And a very good piece of news. Just in December, the Senate passed a version of that bill, and it was actually initiated by the government, which is very politically significant. And that's called Bill S-15. It could achieve the world's first legislated elephant captivity phase-out. So we made great progress. Unfortunately, the bill did not become law before the election was called. But we hope to see it pass in the next few years, depending on the outcome of the election. And you can see Dr. Goodall there and Senator Marty Klein, who sponsored Bill S-15 and who I'm currently honored to work for. And I should also note Bill S-15 is supported by 4 major Canadian zoos, which is an interesting development, including one that agreed to phase out elephants in supporting the bill. It's also supported by SHARE. And I'm sure of interest, particularly those interested in personhood and things like that. Bill S-15, in its form passed by the Senate, included a type of limited legal standing for captive whales and dolphins, as well as the other species. It would have allowed a judge to relocate them with costs in sentencing for illegal breeding or shows, according to their best interests. So this is a bit similar legally to personhood, though limited to criminal sentencing. And I hope that this will become law in the next few years, and we'll have more good news to share from Canada. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty, for your presentation, your advocacy, and ending our panel today on such a hopeful note. Apologies that we are just out of time, so we won't have time for our Q&A today, but thank you to our panelists, sponsors, and all of you for joining us to celebrate World Aquatic Animal Day. We hope that you'll join us for our second WAD panel today, Blue Frontiers, Legal and Scientific Advances for Aquatic Animals, from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you find yourself in the Washington, D.C. area, we invite you to attend the event in person at GW Law School. If not, virtual attendance is encouraged. We'd love to see you online in just a few hours. I'll put the registration link in the chat box if you're interested in joining us later. I'll put that in right now. Perfect. And thanks again for attending today's Turning the Tide Systemic Change for Aquatic Animals World Aquatic Animal Day event. We'll see you this afternoon for panel 2 and next year for World Aquatic Animal Day. Have a great day, everyone.